Hey everyone, it's Zack Beck. California's been going through a tough time over the last year with the pandemic, economic uncertainty, social unrest, as well as lots of people leaving the state for other parts of the country. This has actually triggered a recall election here in the state of California against our current sitting governor, Gavin Newsom. And this is causing a lot of candidates to jump into the race, including YouTube's own Meet Kevin. So what I want to do in this video is break down in detail what is going on with the recall election, the different candidates that are pursuing this particular office, and the likelihood of this recall actually coming to fruition where we'll have a new governor moving forward from here. So let's take our time, dive in the details, and jump into it right now. As previously mentioned, California is going to have a recall election against our current governor, Gavin Newsom. You might have heard of the recall elections that have happened in California in the past. Back in 2003, former Governor Gray Davis was actually recalled, and we ended up having Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger. This is a certain process that we have here in the state of California where if voters are not satisfied with the approach that a certain elected official has taken, then they can actually recall that individual and put a new person in their place. And this happened back in 2003, and it was the first time a sitting governor was ever recalled successfully here in the state of California. What precluded that and actually caused that to get onto the ballot was Governor Gray Davis at that time had some issues related to electricity, and what we had in California were a lot of rolling blackouts occurring where we didn't have certain electricity, and in addition to that, he did decide to raise taxes. So because of those issues, people gathered the required number of signatures to get Governor Gray Davis recalled, and what happens is they actually put a question onto the ballot where it asks voters whether or not you want to recall the person, yes or no, and then on a second question you say, if this person is recalled, who do you want to become the next governor or the next person into that particular position? And back in 2003, we had the Terminator run, and that was Arnold Schwarzenegger. He ran with a lot of star power and a lot of popularity and easily won that election as the top vote getter and actually served 2 terms as governor here in the state of California. Now as we pivot to 2021, where we are right now, we've had a lot happen over the last year. Obviously, the last year in California has been extremely challenging. We had the pandemic, which caused a lot of economic uncertainty, where businesses had to open and close, modify their approaches. People had to wear masks, not wear masks, stay indoors, not go indoors, be able to work in certain industries and have other industries closed. And just like a lot of other states throughout the country and a lot of other areas throughout the world, there was constantly changing things and approaches towards this, and people might have placed some of that blame at the governor's office here in California against Gavin Newsom. Furthermore, we had social unrest over the last year, specifically in light of some of the issues that happened in Minnesota with George Floyd. And that had a trickle effect here in California as well, where we saw social unrest, riots, and other things happening, and a broader conversation about what's going on in race here in the state, but also in the nation as a whole. And then furthermore, we had lots of people deciding to leave California, with some prominent people who are more notable out in society, whether that be Joe Rogan, Elon Musk, even people like Graham Stephan, Ben Shapiro, and others more in the YouTube space, but even other companies were leaving the state as well. Now that's part of the narrative that was happening. It might not necessarily be statistically as accurate because we do see still a lot of people here in the state. And then furthermore, what we're having is people are saying they did so because of higher taxes, cost of living, and maybe a quality of life issue. I actually made an entire video about the reason why people are leaving California. I'll put a link up right here. If you want, you can check that out. But all of that led up to this really culminating moment where people decided to gather signatures to recall the current governor, Gavin Newsom, for his handling of the pandemic. So what I want to do right now is break down in detail what kind of triggered that, even beyond some of the issues that we're seeing right now, and what caused us to actually start getting enough traction to where it is going to appear on the ballot now. So like I said, Gavin Newsom is our current governor. He previously served as the mayor of San Francisco, then he served as the lieutenant governor underneath Jerry Brown, and now he has been serving as our current governor, and he is someone who's been in politics for a long time, connected to some very notable individuals in politics such as Nancy Pelosi and others. But right now what we're finding is California is being run primarily by the Democratic Party, and as you'll know, Gavin Newsom is a Democrat. I'm not here to say whether a Republican, Democrat, or Independent is the right thing to do. I believe in balance and moderation when it comes to politics, and I want you to make the best decisions that are for yourself, that really reflect your principles and your values. So I'm not here to take a stance or a side. I'm just going to kind of give you the assessment of what's going on. What we have is because in the state legislature, both the Assembly and the Senate and the governor's office, they're all controlled by the Democratic Party, so that is a one-party rule. Generally, when that happens, no matter what kind of party is in power, whether it's the federal level, state level, or local level, when you don't have a balancing party that has power, it generally allows one party to kind of move forward on a lot of legislation. So what we've seen is a trend over the last 5 to 6 years or so here in California, where we're seeing more democratic priorities and principles coming to fruition. And that is reflected in the court system, it's reflected in our tax code, it's reflected in certain social policies and economic endeavors. And what we've seen is maybe certain people not necessarily liking that and deciding to leave the state because of the higher taxes and maybe some quality of life issues that they're seeing. That is not to say that those policies were bad, it's just what is happening. But when we had the pandemic come to fruition, a lot of emergency powers were then centralized in the governor himself, because he becomes basically the chief person associated with the emergency response team, and that is why he can make more significant claims and significant summons and basically say that he's putting out a decree or a statement that this is what the state has to do. So specifically what happened is that as the pandemic started to come to fruition, people had already begun gathering signatures to want to recall Gavin Newsom, maybe for more politically aligned reasons, maybe more partisan reasons. And then during the pandemic, over the course of the summer, something pretty significant happened that really frustrated a lot of people. And that is because at that time, Gavin Newsom had been telling individuals that you were not allowed to eat out at restaurants, you couldn't really hang out with people outside of your households, you need to maintain social distancing, wear a mask, and try and flatten the curve and do everything that we could do to protect people from the pandemic. But then he was photographed at a venue, specifically at a restaurant, a highfalutin restaurant, kind of called French Laundry, up in Napa Valley, where he was seated at a table, not wearing a mask, with a large group of individuals who were all politically connected to him, including one of his political consultants. And this picture went viral, picked up by national media outlets, and he received a lot of criticism because at the same time he was telling people that they should stay at home and not go out, he was out himself. So there was a little bit of that hypocrisy right there. For his credit, he did come out and apologize, said that he was wrong and did everything to that extent, but the damage was already done from a political standpoint, because up until that point, the recall election where gathering signatures was going on didn't really come together yet. They didn't have a lot of signatures, but after that moment, we saw a lot more people willing to sign this recall petition, including Democrats, Independents, and Republicans. That trend line has continued, and now they've gathered the required number of signatures that have been submitted to the California Secretary of State to actually get this onto this recall election onto the ballot. So up until this point, it appears as though the recall election is actually going to come to fruition because the people have gathered enough signatures. They actually submitted over 2 million, they needed 1.5 million, and that is getting certified by the Secretary of State. Now, if this appears on the ballot here in 2021, it's going to have two questions. The first question is, would you like to recall Gavin Newsom from office? Yes or no? And then secondly, if recalled, who would you like to have replaced as a new governor? And that brings up a list of candidates, which there are already a lot of people jumping into this race. So what I want to do right now is go into detail about some of the more prominent candidates that have jumped in. You might have heard in the news recently that some prominent people have jumped in, including Caitlyn Jenner. Now, this is an individual who has a lot of notoriety and fame, formerly Bruce Jenner, someone who is a decathlete, someone very well known with the Keeping Up with the Kardashians television program, but a lifelong Republican and someone who's running in this race, has more notoriety from personality and fame on TV and what they did in the Olympics. Then we have Kevin Faulconer, who is the former mayor of San Diego, running as kind of a Chamber of Commerce Republican. He has a pretty good record in California here, specifically in San Diego, but running as a Republican. Then we have John Cox, who's a businessman here in San Diego as well. He is running for governor. He actually ran against Gavin Newsom in the general election back in 2018 and lost significantly. And that is because the registration here in the state is really predominantly Democratic. Then we have almost an even split between the number of registered Republican voters and independent voters. So when you just have a Republican and a Democrat on the ballot in a statewide race, generally speaking, the Democrat has a substantial advantage. And that is what we saw happen, not just at the governor's race, but all of the other statewide races, whether it's Secretary of State, Senator, Treasurer, or any of the other kind of types of Attorney General, or any of the other positions that we have throughout the state. So right now, this recall presents a really unique kind of election. It's kind of a strange election because you're not necessarily going to have all the people voting in it that normally would, because it's not held at a regular time. And to that extent, what we're finding is that this is going to be an all-mail election, similar to what we had in the presidential election cycle, where you will be mailed a ballot and you have the option of either Voting by mail, you could actually submit it at a vote center, or if for some reason you lose your ballot and you're unable to vote, you'll have the option to go on election day and actually vote at a polling place itself. So there's a lot that goes into this, but one of the things that I found very interesting that piqued my curiosity is that one of our fellow YouTubers decided to jump into the race, and that is Meet Kevin, also known as Kevin Paffrath, and someone who talks a lot about personal finance, investing, real estate, and other elements of politics as well, and I found it fascinating that he's jumping into the race. Now, he just announced that he's jumping in and he's running for governor, and someone who I thought had a very kind of unique proposal coming together. He's running on a platform that I believe will generate a lot of interest and actually addresses some of the concerns for a lot of the people who've already left the state or might even be considering leaving the state. And so what I want to do is kind of break down in detail what is going on with his campaign proposals and how they could potentially affect the state if he were to become governor. And on that note, one of the things he's requesting is he wants to have no income state tax for people making under $250,000. And if that were to be the case, that would really dramatically cut taxes for millions of people here throughout the state of California. Now, in addition to that, he's asking for a flat tax on those who make above $250,000. Furthermore, he's wanting to put forward a proposal that would actually end homelessness according to his approach with what are called future homes. And part of that is that he's also wanting to reform the housing approach done here in the state of California, where you'd actually have more of a streamlined process, less red tape for people to actually build, not just in high density areas, but also in areas that haven't been explored yet. Furthermore, when it comes to the education system, he's talked about future schools, not just necessarily having people only go to high school and then to community college, but actually leveraging what's going to be coming from some of the federal proposals, some of the federal government money that's come out with the American Rescue Plan, the American Jobs Plan, and the American Families Plan, and actually leveraging some of those resources and pouring them into future schools where students would have the option to actually learn maybe a trade or a technical skill in computing and coding or otherwise that actually provides people with the ability to maybe go into an entry-level job that could actually sustain them long term. So those are some of the key proposals he's also talked about. He also talked about a carbon tax to deal with the environment, more focus on community policing, and other areas that I thought were fascinating, especially with around what he's talking about reforming the court system here in California as well. And since Meet Kevin is a peer of mine, a fellow YouTuber, and someone who's deciding to jump into this race running for the highest office in the land, I just wanted to bring that to your attention just so you're aware of it. Not necessarily saying that you need to vote for him or for Caitlin or for against the recall or for the recall or for John Cox or for any of the other candidates that are jumping in. I just want to inform you of what is going on because this is going to be a very fluid race. It's going to come up quickly and people should really have a well-rounded understanding of what's going on, the different issues associated with it, so you can make a well-informed decision that reflects your values. You might be asking yourself, is the recall going to be successful and will Gavin Newsom actually be recalled from office? Now, what I would say is recent polling has been showing that the majority of Californians do not support the recall election. And that means that if the first question, if the majority of people say no to the recall, then Gavin Newsom will stay in office as the governor and will be up for election in 2022. But because of this election occurring at a unique time in an off year and also being an all-male election where people might not be as motivated to vote because it's not going to have a presidential question or anything to that extent on it, it's really going to be interesting and it might be closer than most people anticipate that it will be. And because of that, I think it's important for you to know the different candidates that have been running. That's why I wanted you to be aware of the main 4 candidates that are running right now: Caitlyn Jenner, Kevin Faulconer, John Cox, and then Meet Kevin, Kevin Paffrath. And what you're going to find is that other people will jump into the race, but right now these are the people who have the most notoriety and the most money and probably the best organizations that are going to be your most top-tier candidates that also reflect both parties. So it's going to be interesting to go in that direction. California also has some other things going for it right now that have been recently reported. We're doing better when it comes to the pandemic. We're also seeing our state moving into more of a post-pandemic approach where more of the regulations and restrictions are being lifted. Furthermore, from a financial perspective, because of those high taxes that we talked about earlier, California is actually running a budget surplus above $70 billion right now. So we're actually in a better financial position as a state. This does not necessarily mean that a lot of the businesses or individuals are doing well financially, but the state is doing well in that respect. So there's a lot of things that are actually kind of trending in a positive direction. So what you're going to see is that maybe the overall sentiment when we're looking at an election happening either in October or November of 2021 might be different than it was a number of months ago when people were signing those recall petitions when they were more frustrated. So right now it's difficult to say what's going to happen, and obviously polling is relatively limited, but that is where things stand right now. I just think that it's important for you to be aware of all of these things. So that way, if you live in California or if you live in a different state and you're just curious about what's going on right now, you have a better context understanding of what actually is likely to occur. And if it occurs, what could happen after then. We could have some history made if the recall does come together and some new candidate actually becomes governor. Maybe a YouTuber does become governor, which would be really interesting. Or we might see the status quo. We might have Gavin Newsom continue on in this position. I'm not here to take a position myself on this. I just want you to be aware of it. So that's something I believe is important. But on that note, I want to share something I believe is almost transcends a lot of these different things. And I think when it comes to our understanding of politics, too often we become entertained by it and it becomes almost a source for us to actually find more drama and intrigue. And we almost put our lives in a position where we really associate ourselves specifically just with one political party or one particular candidate because we're really connected to them. But I think for you and I to be aware of when it comes to politics, we really should take as objective of an approach as possible as it reflects our lives and also how it affects our community and the people around us. So you just want to make sure when you're voting behind your principles, you're making decisions that reflect those for yourself, not just getting swept up in the craze of something or maybe just one particular personality or anything to that extent. But also when you're looking at how you can affect your life in a tangible way, more so than even the government does, what I talk about frequently on this channel is the importance of having a well-rounded personal financial approach. And when it comes to that, what I recommend that you do to really provide yourself with a stable footing so you can make wise decisions that allow you to achieve your long-term goals, try and do everything you can to cut spending, try to do everything you can also to save money where you're able to, avoid lifestyle inflation, avoid debt outside of a mortgage, and try and invest in the things that you understand, maybe into index funds. That way you can actually achieve your goals long-term by having a steady approach where you're actually putting your money into a position where you're not really solely worried about what the governor is going to do or the president is going to do or your mayor is going to do. That way you're kind of taking the reins of your life from a financial perspective and allowing that to be able to guide you and help provide what you need for yourself and for your family. So I think those are very important principles that we should be aware of, irrespective of what is going on politically. Then when it comes to other elements of our life, our spiritual habits, our personal approach towards our relationships, those are other areas that we need to focus on as well. And you just want to make sure you don't get too consumed with politics, because as someone who has run for office, been elected to office, and has been around politics for a long time, I believe it's very important to stay grounded, not to get too caught up in a lot of these things, and make sure that you're still making wise decisions that affect yourself to prevent yourself from ever falling behind just because a candidate loses an election or your party isn't in power, because those things at the end of the day are important and have an effect, but they're not nearly as important as the decisions you are making for yourself and the personal responsibility we have to be able to provide for ourselves, our families, and to make a positive impact in our communities. With all that being said, I'd like to thank you for watching the video today. If you wouldn't mind, please tap the like button for the YouTube algorithm. Help push this video, other people might need to hear it. Furthermore, if you have any questions, please comment down below. I'd love to interact with you, get to know you, do any research on your behalf so you can make well and wise decisions for yourself moving forward from here. Furthermore, if you wouldn't mind, please subscribe to the channel. That would mean a lot to myself personally, as I do everything I can to create positive content that makes positive impact in your life by encouraging you and myself to lead lives of meaning and purpose, all while maintaining balance and moderation. And if you do subscribe to the channel, please tap the notification bell. That will notify you every time I post a video, which I do on a weekly basis. Once again, I'd like to thank you for watching the video today. I hope you have a wonderful day. Talk to you next time.